Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our monthly seminar here. We are doing this on Teams for the first time. I'm hoping that you can see me, although I'm not exactly certain of that right at the moment. We do have this set up for questions, so feel free to answer or ask questions as we go forward. It's also being recorded, so that if you want to go back and listen to this or share this, you're more than welcome to do so. And of course, the slideshow and the SHRM code will also be shared after this. This is my first time doing a Teams meeting, and I'm also known as a technical jinx. So we are going to keep our fingers crossed that I can actually work this today and that we can move forward. So if you have problems seeing anything or can't figure out what's going on, please let me know, and we will try to address it here. All right. I've already lost part of the thing here. That's okay. We'll just keep going. All right. I'm Ann Lavelle. For those of you who don't know me, in my prior life, I spent over 20 years counseling employers as an attorney in every aspect of labor and employment law. I finally came to my senses and retired. That's a joke. And to spend more time with my kids. And now I'm able to do this, which is wonderful, because the one thing I always enjoyed with my work was the education part of it, the training part of it. So today we are going to dive in, and I'm still trying to get back my little screen here. That is not what I wanted, if you guys are seeing that. All right, moving along. Somehow I've added closed captioning to our presentation today. That's all right. We'll try to get that off too. Well, this should be an exciting day today, technology-wise. We're going to talk about leaves of absence. And when I practiced law, this was often a bane of employers' existence, to try to figure out how this should all work, how it should gel together, and how things should look. No, that's not what I wanted either. If I keep hitting enough buttons, maybe I'll get the right button here. So give me 1 second to try to bring back my little video screen here. All right. I've lost the question and answer button right at the moment, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. This is sort of the overview. We do these seminars once a month, typically on the second Thursday of the month, although it does vary a little bit. We also do quarterly seminars where it's live and in person, and those tend to be fun. So feel free, you, friends, family, whatever. You don't have to be a client. You can come join and listen and go from there. So this is sort of the roadmap of where we're headed today. We're going to use a real life situation. I have changed some of the facts, like the type of employer that it was, just to protect the privacy of those individuals who are involved in the situation. And we're also going to add little details so that this webinar will cover anybody, whether you're a small employer with 4 employees or a large employer with 10,000 employees. What we're going to talk about is applicable to everybody, and we'll talk about how it differs a little bit between the sizes of employers. So let's talk about our background here. Hey, mysteriously, my buttons reappeared. So if you can see me, I think I can now see questions. Again, I've changed the type of employer, but we're going to say it was a local salon in Allegheny County. Like most employers that are trying to hire lower level workers, they were desperate for employees to help the stylists. They're open 6 days a week, 7 to 7. The salon attends a local career fair, and this was true, where soon-to-be high school graduates are also attending via a school program. So we've got a trade school, essentially, that's attending high school trade school. And the kids have resumes that they're handing out. And the salon receives a resume from a senior who's about to graduate. And the salon hires the graduating senior to be a low-level, what I would call gopher. She's a jack of all trades. Whatever they need done, she's going to go do it. Stock shelves, take out trash, clean stuff, whatever. She has little to no customer contact, and she works less than 20 hours a week and is not eligible for any of their benefits. Now, anybody sitting on the call here or on the webinar, and I hope and pray it's working. See anything that jumps out at you that you'd like to tell me, hey, this jumps out at me right at the moment. While you're maybe looking at how to type the message in, and I'm looking at how to answer it. One thing to keep in mind here is when they interviewed this person. So they got the resume at the career fair. When they interviewed her, the main boss was not there. The boss was out because her kid was sick. A person who had never interviewed anybody before interviewed this young lady. And kind of the funny part of it was the young lady said, hey, I've never been on an interview, or the person who was doing the interviewing said, hey, I've never done an interview before. I'll just give you a tour. Gave her a tour of the salon, and the young lady who was being interviewed was like, well, hey, I've never had an interview before, so this is perfect. The person who did the interviewing reported to the supervisor that the young lady, who's about 18, seemed fine and seemed friendly and nice, and they hired her. Okay, I don't see anybody saying anything exciting about this. And of course, we've already had some exciting facts here. I don't know if that's because I can't see what's going on or if nobody cares. Anyways, we'll keep plowing away. It turns out that the new employee is on the autism spectrum, but very high functioning, just a bit socially awkward. No intellectual disability, but she has a multitude of physical disabilities, ranging from a heart defect to a rare genetic issue that causes her to be a little physically slow because her balance is off and a bit uncoordinated. She walks slower than average and cannot alternate steps going up and down the stairs. So if you've ever seen a young child starting off with walking, they don't alternate their feet going up and down the steps. They put them together and go one and then bring the other foot down, etc. She requires 2 surgical procedures a year because she needs her stomach valve dilated to allow for the passage of food. It's a symptom of her genetic condition. These procedures take her out of work for about a week of time, but she also has a multitude of doctor's appointments, most of which she schedules when she is not scheduled to work. The employer did not know all of this when they hired her, but it became obvious, and she has been open about her medical issue because sometimes she needs time off for the appointments and surgeries. So jump in and say, gosh, I see something there that I think we should discuss. Feel free. Of course, my buttons may or may not be working. She's a great employee. She has physical problems, perhaps a mental problem as well. If you count autism as usually a psychological, treated by a psychiatrist or psychologist. But she's a great employee. She's 18 when she starts and does not play on her cell phone during working hours. Right there, the employer is just stunned. They think this is nothing shy of a miracle because historically they've had problems with teenagers playing on their phones and not doing work. She always shows up early. She is kind, and although a little awkward, she's friendly to customers, although her contact with them is infrequent. She generally knows about her doctor's appointments months in advance if she can't get them scheduled during a non-working shift, and gives the employer plenty of notice so that they don't put her on the schedule. She's a hard worker. She has received glowing performance reviews and raises over the last 18 months. She doesn't make a ton of money. She makes about $15 an hour, but she's gotten raises, and she really loves her job. Let's start off with saying we have a non-FMLA employer. FMLA employers start with 50 or more employees, but there's a lot of small companies out there that are under that. Everybody in this situation is happy as a clam. Nobody's upset. The 18-year-old, who's now almost 20, loves her job. She never thought anyone would hire her. She is relatively inexperienced and accepts whatever happens at work. So in other words, she never questions anything. She's not old and jaded like some of us who would be like, why do I have to do that? Or I can't believe they made me do that, and whatever. She does not have the sophistication to know one way or another if the employer was following employment laws. She just knows they're kind to her. The employer truly is kind, and they mean well. and they try to follow the law, they're small enough that they have no internal HR. That's a really common thing with employers. Usually employers don't start to get internal HR until they're 50 to 100 employees. Although I've seen some employers that were quite large and still didn't have internal HR, which usually got them in trouble. But in any event, they would never intentionally deny an employee what is legally required. But as with all of us, they don't know what they don't know. Are we good? Is everybody happy and we can just go on with life and, life is excellent and all that good stuff? Or do we have some concerns? Again, anybody who wants to chime in, please feel free. I'm not sure I'm seeing the questions or the comments because of the buttons here, but if something pops up and I can see it, I absolutely will answer it. We're not good, right? I wouldn't be talking about this if we were good. So let's tackle the first issue here, the benefits, right? This employee is not eligible for benefits. The handbook is quite clear, and she works less than 20 hours a week. And I have somebody who's much smarter than me who's coming in to look at my buttons to see if we can find any questions or comment button that I have managed to lose on my screen here. But I'll keep talking while she does that. And if you see things popping up and down on my screen, that's because somebody much smarter than me is working on the computer here. I am the technical jinx, so these are the things that happen. In any event, okay, excellent. We have found some questions here. Okay, so somebody said, and I tend to agree with this, it sounds like I'd rather deal with the time off to have the stellar employee. You know what? She truly was a stellar employee. This employer loved her. She may not have been a rocket scientist, and she may not, and she may have these medical problems, but she really did attempt to schedule everything when she wasn't working. Hey, I see I'm here too. That's great. I'm in the picture. Okay, gosh, you can tell I'm a little clueless on Teams, but we'll get there. I agree with that. And that's pretty much what they said too. They liked her. They were like, hey, this is wonderful. She doesn't play with her phone, whatever. I have two people at least who are saying, what about reasonable accommodations? You're absolutely right. We're going to get to that. And I'm so glad that something is working on Teams. Somebody else said, yes, it's working. That's a good thing, because I was seriously doubting whether or not I was just like talking to myself here, which would not be the first time in my life that I have talked to myself. I have 4 kids. It happens frequently. In any event, so yes, you guys are thinking along the right track. We're going to get to the reasonable accommodation thing here in a second. I'm going to go back to trying to share my screen here. So we'll get to that, but first let's talk about the benefits issue. The handbook, we started over at the beginning. Okay. The handbook is crystal clear that you have to work at least 20 hours a week for health insurance, life insurance, PTO, salon discounts, etc. Is that okay? Well, in typical attorney talk, yes and no. You always got to get a clear answer from an attorney, right? Federal law here is not implicated. They're too small for the FMLA. State laws, at least in Pennsylvania, would not be implicated. But we mentioned this employer is in Allegheny County. Local law is always something that needs to be considered. The Allegheny County has the paid sick leave ordinance, and it's clearly implicated here. Any employer with 25 or more employees is subject to this law. If you're in the city of Pittsburgh, there's a separate city of Pittsburgh sick leave law, and it pretty much dovetails with Allegheny County, but you would be looking at both of those if you're in the city of Pittsburgh. The employees who are eligible, so this employer is covered. They have 35 employees. What does their handbook say? This employee doesn't get anything. No PTO, no nothing. Doesn't even talk about the Allegheny County paid sick leave law, even though it came out in 2021. So we're 2 years more or less out from it. They're covered. But again, you don't know what you don't know, right? The employees who are eligible to take leave can be part-time or full-time and are eligible so long as they're working in Allegheny County. Clearly, this young lady was. The employee is covered. So we've got an employer who's covered. We have an employee who's covered. The conditions covered include a whole bunch of things. Includes preventive care, medical treatment, care for family members, etc. The law says she must earn 1 hour of paid time off for every 35 hours worked. She works roughly 15 hours a week. She has 1 hour paid time off earned in a little over 2 weeks. So, for those of us who are math impaired, that would be me. We're just going to say she earns about an hour every 2 weeks, and she can start using the time after the first 90 days of employment. You cannot require a doctor's note unless it's an absence of 3 or more days in a row. So all these appointments that she's had, and again, the vast majority of them have been scheduled outside of when she normally works. She has sort of a steady shift where she works Friday evening, Saturday evening, Monday evening, because they need help on those days. And a lot of people don't want to work Friday and Saturday nights, especially teenagers. I've got a few of them. They want to go out with their friends, right? And so we know this kid has been working for 18 months. We're on the wrong side of the Allegheny County sick leave law, and maybe the Pittsburgh one if we are in Pittsburgh. So one of the things we have to keep in mind is we have a handbook that's illegal on its face, right? If we had an investigator, again, this kid's happy as a clam. She doesn't know what she doesn't know either. She has no idea that she's missing out on this paid time off. When she asks not to be scheduled, if she has an appointment on a Monday, it usually happens on a Monday, because apparently her one cardiologist only sees patients on Monday afternoons. Whatever. And everybody believed that was true. That's not a lie. That's just how the cardiologist worked. She should have been receiving paid time off for that. She wasn't. She was just taking, not working that day or coming in later if she could. If she could get the appointment, early afternoon, she could come in a little bit later for her shift. They were allowing her the time off. That wasn't an issue at all. But I don't know. I'm still having problems here. In any event, that's the issue, is she did not get her paid time off. And everybody who said reasonable accommodation, we're going to get to that, because you're absolutely right. We almost always get leave issues that intersect with other laws like workers' comp, ADA. That would be the reasonable accommodation. But if we look at that first and foremost, just from the paid sick leave law, and by the way, if this employer had had 10,000 employees and been covered by the FMLA, it wouldn't matter. We still have the paid sick leave law issue, right? If she had been eligible for any PTO at all, one of the questions we often get is, can you run PTO concurrently with other leave laws? Yes, especially in Pennsylvania. You would want to run it concurrently because you really don't want them to have multiple bites of the apple. And so let's say because she was part-time, she had 5 PTO days. Absolutely, we would run that concurrently with any leave entitlement under the Allegheny paid sick leave law. And if this employer was an FMLA employer, we would be running FMLA, intermittent FMLA, at the same time. All right, so what do we do here? We've messed this up. We shouldn't panic. That's the first thing, okay? Like, everybody messes stuff up. It happens. So certainly going forward, we're going to fix it for her and everybody else, because if we didn't know about it for her, we probably have screwed it up for someone else as well. We're not going to rely on the naivete of this young disabled employee and just ignore this, right? Just because she doesn't know, if we have found out that we are on the wrong side of the law, we're going to fix it. Clearly, she should have been paid for time off over the last 18 months, and she'll be eligible for paid time off going forward. Ideally, we're going to retroactively fix it if we have enough information. One of the things this small employer did or didn't do is they didn't document well. So when she would say, hey, I need Monday off because I have a cardiology appointment, or I need to come in late, or whatever it is, did they write that down? No, of course not. She was telling her direct supervisor, who was the lowest level supervisor in the whole organization. And again, I've given this a salon background. It was an employer different than a salon. So if people are sitting here saying, "Gosh, this salon, it sounds like a huge one," it's because it really wasn't a salon. But anyway, um, one of the other things we've got here that jumps out is the direct supervisor clearly doesn't have enough training, and we'll talk about more why she doesn't have enough training, because she should have been even if she didn't know about the Allegheny paid sick leave law. When we get into the ADA, she should have been documenting this. So in any event, we may or may not have enough information to figure out which day she took off, because she did take off for a beach vacation too. What day she took off for the appointments that would have qualified her for this. We may or may not have the records, which, by the way, is also a violation of the Allegheny County sick leave law, because we are responsible for having the records. If we were an FMLA employer and this lady had enough hours for FMLA, we'd also be in violation of the FMLA, because it's our affirmative duty to keep good records to track everything. So in any event, we could talk to her. That's probably the best outcome, and say, we had a little oopsie doodle. They're on good terms. They love her. She loves them. And say, hey, you earned about 20 hours, again, keeping the math simple, last year. And we're just going to pay them out to you to make sure that we have sort of covered ourselves. Or we can roll them over to this year to count towards your maximum of 40 sick leave hours. We could do either one. Either one would be a reasonable solution to this. And then, of course, we're going to correctly count her hours, because that's our affirmative burden, count the hours, so that we know each time she hits 35 hours and earns another hour. Either way, we're not panicking. This is an inexpensive problem for every company, even the smallest of companies that maybe just hit this threshold of 25 to fix. She earns $15 an hour times about 20 hours. We owe her about $300 probably. That's less than paying an attorney 1 hour of time to talk to them probably. So this is an inexpensive, easily fixed problem. Even if we end up overpaying her for last year's hours, maybe we say, gosh, she might have only worked 18. Our records aren't very good. We can't tell. It's a cheap fix, right? Why would you take the risk of not fixing it and have an investigation and God knows what all? Because again, if we've screwed it up for her, we've probably screwed it up for somebody else. And if we have screwed it up for somebody else, we're going to fix them too. It's probably a very inexpensive fix. All right, feel free to ask questions, and I'm going to hope that the smart person comes back and helps me find the questions again. Amy, if you're out there. Okay, so what else? So this is what several people raised. What about a reasonable accommodation? So absolutely, there is no question that she is disabled under the ADA. The ADA kicks in with 15 or more employees. So even if you were under that 25 number and too small for the Allegheny County sick leave law, you're covered by the ADA. And if you're sitting there saying, hallelujah, I'm under 15 employees, I only have 6, guess what? You're covered by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, which starts with 4 or more employees. If you're less than 4 employees, then you're not covered by either law, and you really don't have to take the disability and reasonable accommodation into account. But if you have 4 or more employees in Pennsylvania, you're going to need to take the ADA or the PHRA, which mimics the ADA, into account. We have the smart person back to look for questions here. In any event, hopefully I'll go smoother next time. So do we have problems? We seem to already be accommodating her, right? We're letting her walk slower. We don't care that she can't go down the steps. Oh, now we can't see her slides. Hold on. We're going to try to fix that too. Give us 1 minute here. Questions. Like, how do I get back to the question? Give us 1 second here. Okay. All right. So they love her, right? No big issues. We're giving her time off for the appointments. And frankly, under the ADA or the PHRA, That is what we should be doing. Those are easy accommodations, right? Are you going to really tell an investigator? By the way, this place, the only place they have stairs is into their facility. So once she gets in or out, the stairs thing falls away. Um, there's like one tiny step within their organization. So we're accommodating her. What didn't we do though? We really haven't documented that at all. We don't have anything that says, hey, we recognize that she has told us X, Y, and Z, and therefore we're allowing her to be a little slower. We're allowing her off for the appointments. We're doing a poor job of documentation. Let me add an additional wrinkle into this. In the first 3 months of her employment, she one time made the comment to her direct supervisor, who again is lowest level supervisor in the building, that she prefers evening shifts, 2 to 7, rather than 7 to 12, to allow her medicines to kick in the morning so she doesn't feel as dizzy. She doesn't want to risk passing out, and her blood pressure and heart rate can regulate, etc. She attends cardiac rehab twice a week, and they know that because she is trying to avoid the necessity of a pacemaker surgery. The supervisor had said no problem. Typically, she does work evenings, but recently one of the morning gophers, for lack of a better word, quit, and they've been putting the employee on more morning shifts to cover. They hired a guy who can work evenings but can't work mornings, so they moved this young lady to the mornings. Where do we have an issue now? Hopefully people are looking at this, and I'm going to look at the next sounds over here, see if we have any additional questions. Okay, doesn't look like. So we have multiple issues here, right? First, we have a direct supervisor, and any company, whether they have 4 employees or 10,000 employees, should have direct supervisors who know enough to spot an issue. And this one did not. She didn't document the issue. She didn't run it up the flagpole to someone else to say, hey, this young lady said blah, blah, blah. It's not a problem because she works Friday, Saturday, Monday evenings. She didn't remember, it turned out, the conversation, although others who were there did remember the conversation. She didn't know to document. She didn't know to run it up the flagpole. And we have arguably been giving this young lady an accommodation by letting her work where we needed her Friday, Saturday, and Monday for the last 18 months until we lost somebody in the morning and we moved her there because the only other person we could find could only work afternoons. Does that strike you as a little unfair to this young lady? The direct supervisor is a great, kind lady, right? It's not that she's trying to be mean. She has no recollection of this conversation. Now, where are we? Well, we have problems, right? This is when if you call your legal counsel, they're going to start to cringe a little, but that's okay because you can't see them on the other side of the phone, so it all works out. The employer is an ADA and PHRA covered employer because they have at least 4 employees, probably 15 if they're covered by the ADA. We have an employee with multiple disabilities. The employer has knowledge of this disability every which way. First, the employee has been upfront about it and told them directly, right? She didn't say, I hereby inform you that I have a disability, but she's been honest about her health conditions. They know it from observation, right? They have seen that she is slower. They have seen her problems with steps. And when she started working mornings, actually, she started looking really, really, really ill to them, right? And she had to sit down a few times because she was so dizzy. They've arguably, and I would say very strongly, have received an employee request for accommodation when the employee said, hey, I prefer 2 to 7 because of my health conditions X, Y, and Z. It's critical that employers know that knowledge to a direct supervisor and arguably to any other supervisor who may have seen or overheard some of these discussions is the same as if the employee had told the owner or president of the salon about this. So just because she told this low-level supervisor, even if we had an HR department here, there would be no excuse for us to say, well, hey, she didn't tell the right person. Even if our handbook says you should go tell so-and-so, She told somebody who should have been trained to recognize the issue and run it up the flagpole. And she did. And even if the handbook said, hey, you must tell the owner or the president or whoever, we still have knowledge in a whole bunch of ways about this. Let's take a step back because some of you may be saying, I'm not so sure I'm thrilled to have this employee at this point because it seems like she comes with a lot of employment law baggage. So could we have just like avoided hiring her in the first place and forgotten about all this? So, we did a really poor interview. We had somebody interview her who had never interviewed anyone ever before in their lives and just took her on a tour of the salon. But let's say we had had the most experienced interviewer ever. There's really no legal way that we could have delved into this. The only question that you can really ask is there any reason why you couldn't do the demands of this job, the physical demands, right? If she had said yes to something like, hey, I can do everything except I'm going to be slower on your steps, we would have been subject to the ADA at that point and looking at whether or not we could reasonably accommodate that or not. Or she could have said, hey, I'll need a week off every 6 months for my stomach surgery. We would still be, even though we're at the interview process stage, she isn't hired yet, we're still have the ADA and we're still covered by that. So we would still be looking at whether or not we could do that as a reasonable accommodation. So no, I don't think you could have avoided hiring her. You certainly could have had somebody more experienced. You could have asked the question of whether she was capable of doing the physical demands of the job, assuming you had a job description that showed the demands, which, by the way, they also did not have that. But at the end of the day, I don't think you would have been in a position to say, no, we can't hire her, because those are pretty mild accommodations. Again, we're talking about an employer with 35 employees. If you had an employer with 6 employees who's just barely covered by the PHRA, the answer might have been different, but we still would have had to go through the ADA analysis to know whether or not we could accommodate her. We basically have had a total and complete failure to engage in the ADA mandated interactive process and to document. If besides what she said to us of, geez, I have these issues, right? When she asked for time off, we could ask open-ended questions. And I'm actually a fan of that. If we see somebody who's really struggling, who looks like they've got a physical or mental problem, we don't have to go up to them and say, hey, I think you're physically disabled and we need to engage in the ADA interactive process. But we can ask an open-ended question. Are you okay? That's pretty much what had happened. Whenever she said, I need appointments off, days off for appointments, or she was sitting down in a chair because she was so dizzy, they said, are you okay? And she divulged the medical issues. At that point, we should have been documenting, possibly seeking medical proof. That's our right under the ADA. It's not our right under the Allegheny County sick leave law, but that's okay because we're asking for the documentation for reasonable accommodation, not for the paid time off. So we can, even though it seems inconsistent, we can do that. And we may have said, hey, we'd like to see medical proof that you need these accommodations, like being slower on the steps or working 2 to 7, because arguably we have a request for an accommodation to work that schedule, even though that's what we put her in first and foremost anyway. And that was what she was hired to do. The request for evening should have been documented and probably honored. We probably look like the bad guy for moving her to the morning shift, right? And hiring somebody else whenever, they loved her. She loved them. It was all good. Whenever you have ADA information, whether that's documenting, and this goes for FMLA or any type of medical information, whether that's documenting the need for leave or the disability or the medical proof of the leave, you need to keep the records separate from the employment file. That's critical. I've seen a number of employers get dinged for having that in their personnel file. It needs to be separate and apart from the personnel file. It needs to be a separate medical file. The EEOC, when they investigate things, always looks at that. And again, I've seen a number of employers get dinged because they didn't realize that was required. So we should be documenting it, but keeping it separate. So let's move on. Let's change a couple of things here. And again, just to recap, if we had 5 employees, right, 4 or more, we'd still have a PHRA problem, which is the same as an ADA problem of accommodating and not discriminating against her because of the disabilities. If we have 25 or more employees, we would have had the Allegheny County sick leave law issue. If we had 50, and we're going to talk about that in a second, we would have had FMLA as well. All right. So there's a new development here, okay? And again, this was not a salon, but it was a local business here. It had multiple owners. The majority owner decides to retire, and her shares of the salon have been purchased by a large national chain. The chain already has multiple salons in Allegheny County and across the nation. They are huge, tens of thousands of employees. The National Salon is also a federal contractor. They send their transition HR team into the salon. They're so sophisticated, they have a transition HR team. Because now they are going to be the employer. They're going to issue the paychecks. They're going to go by their handbook, et cetera, et cetera. The HR transition team is very sophisticated and meets with each employee. This employee is so nervous during the meeting, and she later explains that she thinks they won't want her and she will lose the job she loves. That she can't remember her home address. Remember, she's 20 years old. Telephone number when they ask. She also doesn't know what township she lives in. That should say lives in, not live in sin. As a side note, poor memory and intellect is also a symptom of the genetic condition she has. She gets completely flustered. Because they are an OFCCP contractor, a federal contractor, they're required to track certain traits and ask certain questions. So they ask this employee if she identifies as a veteran. She says no. They also ask her if she identifies as being disabled. She responds yes. All right, this is our second bite of the apple. We now have somebody who's saying, hey, I'm disabled again. Clearly, that shows we have an issue here. Maybe we haven't done a good job of documenting and handling it now. We ought to be on top of it at this point when somebody says yes to that question, because it's rare that people say yes to that question. All right, so I see somebody has asked a question on my other computer here that somebody has kindly left me who is smarter than I am. And it says, is the direct supervisor an agent of the company to be liable? Yes, absolutely. That direct supervisor is 100% an agent of the company. And if she messes up, the liability is on the company. So one of the issues we had was the direct supervisor. She knew the most of anybody about this young lady's problems. She knew the most of anybody about the nature of her condition, the amount of doctor's treatment she needed. And she had gotten the request, although she didn't remember it, but others who had been in the room at the same time remembered the discussion of, hey, I really like working this evening shifts. I don't care if it's always Friday and Saturday. This young lady said she didn't really have friends to go out with. And so she's okay with working Friday, Saturday, Monday. She likes those shifts because she doesn't feel well in the mornings because of her heart problems. So in any event, yeah, absolutely. That person is a federal contract or is a agent of the company. Thank you for that question. All right. So after the meetings, the HR transition team, the crack team of the new employer returns to home base, never to be heard from again. They did not pass this information on to anyone. They certainly should have had a discussion. If somebody seems that confused during an interview, they're 20 years old and they can't come up with their home address, even if they had not had to ask the OFCCP questions about whether or not the person's disabled. There were so many red flags there that somebody should have been talking to that employee and looking at the situation better, especially now that we have a national company with tons of resources that they could have thrown at this. By the way, the national company's handbook that they gave out, guess what it didn't have in it? The Allegheny County sick leave law, because this was one of their first. They had other companies in Allegheny County, but And the law was passed in 2021. This was the first buy, merger, or whatever they had had since 2021. They didn't think about the local laws. So their handbook was also patently illegal on its face. Let me ask this. What if the employee had to miss appointments because she had been slipped and fallen on the suds from the shampoo and had recurring back problems that were workers' comp? What would we have done? Would we have done anything differently? So the question there is, we would run PTO. We would run the Allegheny County sick leave law, and the workers' comp would be offset by any amount she was receiving from that. And if we were an FMLA employer, we would be running the FMLA at the same time as the workers' comp need for leave of absence if she had enough hours for the FMLA. So just because it's workers' comp does not mean that everything else goes out the window and that we don't still count the Allegheny County sick leave law, the ADA, which might come into place. What if she never recovers from her back injury and always has a lifting restriction or something like that? The ADA would still kick in. We would be looking at a reasonable accommodation if she was disabled because of the workers' comp injury. Which, by the way, you can't force somebody to just be off on workers' comp if they're capable of working and they want to work, which is a good thing. You do have to look at the ADA and whether or not you can accommodate them, even if it's workers' comp. All right. So the employer is, let's say we have an FMLA employer, which we do now because we have merged with a ginormous employer. It's part of a larger national chain. It has way more than 50 employees. And there are more than 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. So those of you who are FMLA employers know that that's important if an employee needs leave in a certain location. So even though there's not 50 employees within that particular salon, within Allegheny County, there certainly is more than 50 employees. This employee, if she worked at least 12 months, which does not have to be consecutive, and 1,250 hours within the last 12 months for the employer, is now eligible for FMLA and still eligible for the Allegheny County paid sick leave law. Now, this employee did not work enough hours to be eligible, but we're going to pretend that she does because FMLA ends up being about 24 hours a week in order to be eligible. If she was only working about 15. This employer, though, if this lady had had enough hours, was certainly on notice of the need for FMLA leave. So you would be running FMLA, right? You'd be looking at the ADA and the local leave laws with respect to this lady. And if it was workers' comp, you'd have that as an additional layer. And if she had been eligible for any type of PTO, we'd have that too. So we'd be looking at 5 things that we're going to run consecutively if she's eligible for all of that. Is anybody's head spinning at this point? Okay, everybody's hanging in there, I hope. All right. We want her on the FMLA clock. By the way, I think what I omitted to mention about the Allegheny County sick leave law, not only would our handbook be illegal, we probably didn't have the poster or the notice up about it either. So that's a problem. FMLA, you need a poster or a notice as well. The handbook needs to be updated to recognize that they're now eligible for FMLA. That's true at the time of hire or when the employer becomes covered, and then you redistribute the handbook or the notice indicating that they're FMLA eligible. The FMLA is a federal law, and there's lots of forms to go with it if you are an FMLA employer. So the first form, when she says, "Hey, I need time off to go see my cardiologist," assuming she has enough hours, and I need to take Monday off because of that, right? The first thing you should be handing her is what's called a WH-381 eligibility and rights and responsibility notice. Basically, this is a federal form that's online and just says she has enough hours, that a medical certification will be required because that's wise to require it. And it addresses whether benefits such as health insurance and paid leave will be used. Because we're running Allegheny County sick leave law, paid time, or if she had any PTO, yeah, we probably would run them concurrently. We should run them concurrently, or else we're going to be giving her more time than we probably want to. This notice has to be provided within 5 business days of the request for leave. And the request can be very vague, right? She doesn't need to say, I hereby formally request my rights under the Family Medical Leave Act. No, it's enough that she tells us, I have to see a cardiologist once a month, or I have to see a cardiologist once every 3 months to trigger this type of need for leave. We should at least be looking at it at that point. We're going to hand her a medical certification. There's different types of medical certifications. This is going to be for the employee's own health condition, but if it was for a family member or because of a military leave, there are other certifications. She has to turn that in within 15 calendar days. Generally, there are exceptions to that. If for some reason her doctor is like out of town or something and she explains that to us, we can and should extend that time a little bit. And then once we have information that we need, we can say, here's your designation notice, saying either the leave's approved, it's not approved, or we got incomplete information from you. And that can be provided within 5 days of having sufficient information. She does not have to take FMLA leave in increments that are more than about 15 minutes, whatever the time is that our timekeeping system permits. So let's say if on Mondays she could see the doctor at 1 o'clock and be there by 2:30, she's only going to have a half hour of FMLA leave. We can't say, hey, you need to take the whole shift off. So we need to be careful of that we don't force her to take more time off than required, even though we may have a bit of a scheduling problem and a bit of a pain in the you know what, because we've got this 30-minute gap of time where she's not going to be there. All right. Wow, we now have bigger problems. Okay, we have a question. I'm going to look on the other screen here. Okay, we moved into an old building and don't have an elevator yet. Should I make sure climbing stairs is in our job description, even if we can make an accommodation to work in another building on site on ground level? So that is a fantastic question. So let me repeat the question because I was looking at the other computer in our ongoing struggle with computer issues here to see the question. So they're in an old building. There's no elevator. The person has to take the steps. Does that need to be in the job description? So I don't think that's an essential function of the job. It's not like there is a machine on the second floor that person must reach. We know we can accommodate them with a ground level office or an office in another building. So that does not sound to me like an essential function that you would put in the job description unless you told me that, hey, there's something on the second floor that person needs to access all the time. There's some big, I don't know, copier or I don't know, extruder or whatever it might be. So no, I don't think I would put that in the job description. And in the back of my mind, I would know that if somebody applied for the job who has a walker or crutches or a wheelchair, and I don't mean temporary crutches because they sprain their ankle. I mean like the more solid ones that people use all the time. You would know that, hey, because that's not an essential function, and it doesn't matter if their desk is upstairs or downstairs, they can do the job, then we know we're going to just put them in a downstairs desk and they don't have to access the second floor. And in fact, the accommodation will go even further than that. Let's say they need to run a file upstairs now and then. We would actually be looking at having another employee do that as a reasonable accommodation. If they have to run the file up, once or twice a day, somebody else can do that for them. So that's a great question. Okay, somebody else suggested put a physical demand or working conditions section. I assume we're talking about the same question here. Again, I don't think it's an essential function, and we will be accommodating this unless there's some really unusual reason why they can't be on the first floor as a place to sit. Okay, so someone here asked too. So if an employee is on intermittent FMLA leave, employers cannot require them to take 0.5 or full days off. That is a fantastic question as well. So we're looking at overlapping issues here. If we look solely from the FMLA standpoint, we can say, no, we can't require that. The employee is entitled to take the smallest level of increment or smallest time amount off under the FMLA that we can keep track of, which usually shouldn't be more than 15 minutes. Oftentimes, our timekeeping systems can keep track of that in a lot smaller amount. Now, if the employee wants paid for their time off, and again, we have the Allegheny County sick leave law, which is going to say, hey, that person's going to get paid for, a half hour there. Let's say we have a PTO policy, right? Maybe the person has already blown through their Allegheny County sick leave time. If that person wants paid, we can make, because FMLA is unpaid, we can make rules that say, hey, if you want paid for PTO, your absence must be in increments of at least X amount in order to get paid, because we're not going to get into 0.25 of PTO or something like that. We're going to require that you take at least a half a day. So then the employee really has a choice that they can make to say, okay, I need to be paid, so I'm going to take the half day off. Or they can say, you know what, my absence is so short, it's just going to be a half hour. I don't care if I get paid. And I'm okay with that. And I don't want to burn through all my FMLA. So I'm going to take an unpaid half hour. Does that not get confusing? Yes, it does. But that is the analysis we would look at. And it would be the employee's choice, essentially, to say, I'm going to take just the, half hour of FMLA so I don't burn through it. The downside to us when we require things like that is, okay, she's not paid for the half hour, but she hasn't burned through the PTO either. And so that can become a big negative to us as an employer, because we want them generally to burn through their PTO concurrently with the FMLA and everything else. So, okay, hope that answers that. Okay, I think we got everything there. All right, so we now have even bigger problems because big old national company came in with their crack HR transition team and then didn't do anything. So the biggest lesson we can learn from the crack national HR team is it's never good strategy to be an ostrich with your head in the sand. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm worried about asking the question. Then it'll be, I'm perceiving them to have a disability. We can ask an open-ended question. If you have enough information to wonder if you should follow up, you probably have enough information to be on notice of some issue. And we can ask an open-ended, like, are you okay? Is there anything we can do for you? We're not going to come up to them and say, hey, it looks like you're disabled. How bad is it? No, we're going to come up with some question that makes sense, that is provided in a caring way. So the HR team obviously should never have left town, never to be heard from again. This was the employer's second bite of the apple to try to document and open up the ADA interactive process. And if you think about how this looks to a jury, investigator, or anyone else, they really don't look that good right at the moment. So where did this go south? She wasn't quite as good on the morning shift. She was very sick. The new guy was faster and better, but he did play on his phone. The employer eventually just kept reducing this young lady's hours until she had nothing left. That's a terrible and wimpy way of firing somebody, okay? And that just doesn't look good. When she asked about her shifts and where they went to, they basically said they didn't need her anymore, and she was heartbroken. It turned out she also suffered from anxiety and depression, which were severely aggravated by this turn of events. And guess who had an uncle who was an attorney, who was indignant on her behalf when he heard her story? So just because she was too naive to know the difference, this eventually blew up because they had handled this so poorly. There were multiple opportunities that they should have taken advantage of to address the various issues of the Allegheny County paid sick leave law, the ADA accommodations, the FMLA, if that had been an issue for them, to handle this, and they didn't. And really, this makes them poorly positioned. So, lesson of the day is when you have a leave, always think about all the possible overlapping laws that may be out there. Okay, somebody has asked a question. Can a company require employees to use paid time off before starting the FMLA leave? The answer to that is no. If they are FMLA eligible, and in fact, from an employer standpoint, you wouldn't want to do this. If I'm eligible for the FMLA, you can't say, hey, you have to take X, Y, and Z before you start FMLA because it's my right to take it on day one. From the employer perspective, you're going to give them way more time off than they're actually entitled to if you do that. The standard train of thought on this is you want to run that concurrently because let's say they have 3 weeks of PTO and they take all of that. Then they go on to 12 weeks of FMLA. They now have taken 15 weeks off, right? And they may have an ADA issue, which means they would have an extended unpaid leave of absence after that potentially. What you want to do from an employer perspective is run the PTO with the FMLA so that at the end of the FMLA, they've had the 3 weeks of PTO that's paid at the beginning of the FMLA. And then they got like 9 weeks that were unpaid. You may still have the ADA issue of whether they need more time off because that can be a reasonable accommodation at the end of the FMLA leave. But you generally want to run it the same and have them exhaust the PTO. Now, some people will say, oh, we'll let them save a couple PTO days because if somebody has a baby in January and you make them use all their PTO concurrently with the FMLA, that person has no additional time off for the remainder of the year if that kid gets sick or anything happens. That can be a little difficult and may not be the atmosphere that you want. So you may say, okay, you're going to run all of your PTO except for like 2, 3, 5 days, something like that, that you can use later in the year if something comes up. That is a potential alternative. But generally, you want and you don't have the option to tell the person they can't take the FMLA leave until after the PTO. But generally, as an employer, you want to run that concurrently. Okay, I apologize for the tech issues here. We'll get better at the Teams meetings, I promise you. And we'll go from there. I'm also speaking November 14th at the SHRM conference at the Oxford Center. If anybody's attending that, please say hello. And again, we'll be back in December, the second Thursday, to cover another topic. If anybody has ideas for topics, please feel free to send them in. We're always looking for good ideas. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care and enjoy your Thanksgiving.